All right, we will go ahead and get started. So welcome to day 4 of Splatfest. We're so glad you're here. My name is Amanda Bacher, and I am a product marketing manager at Email and Acid. And today we have a session on Ask Me Anything regarding BIMI with Matt Vernhout and Marcel Becker. Before we hand it over to them to start answering all of your questions, I have a few housekeeping items I just want to go over. First of all, we are recording this session today, and we will send out a link shortly after the session ends to everybody who's joining us. And then we will be giving away some free giveaways for people who ask questions during the session. We'll randomly select names and announce the winners at the end of the session. So I'm going to hand it over to them to introduce themselves, and we'll get started.
Hey, I'm Marcel. I'm a product guy at Verizon Media, responsible primarily for anti-abuse as well as what we call our next generation email features for senders. And we run consumer email, Yahoo Mail, and AOL email, as well as the consumer email accounts for Verizon.
And my name is Matthew Vernhout. I'm the Vice President of Deliverability with NetCore Cloud. I'm also the Communications Chair with the BIMI Group, where both Marcel and I are working together along with the other participants to actually come up with the standard and implement BIMI. So we're happy to be here. So just to get started, if you're not familiar with BIMI, hopefully you have at least some understanding, and that's why you're here, because you have some questions for us, and we're happy to help. But if you're not familiar, BIMI basically allows you, when your email is properly authenticated, to put your logo into the actual mail client. To the side here, you can see just a quick example I made up with one of my domains and the logo, and you'll see some additional simulated messages below where you're seeing just a initial avatar. This is a representation of what you might see in a mobile client for email right now when your brand is using BIMI. So where is BIMI currently being supported? So there are 3 of the large mailbox providers currently supporting BIMI to various degrees. So obviously Yahoo and the Verizon Media Group with Marcel and his team, and across their platforms. So all of the domains that Marcel mentioned are also supporting BIMI through this initiative. Fastmail, along with their PO Box domain. So Fastmail is a Australian-based mailbox provider. And Google is currently in their pilot. So this is a pilot that Google has been initiating to implement BIMI on their platforms, both for the consumer domains and the workspace organizations. The simplified way of describing BIMI and how to implement, there are several complexities to this, but just the simplified way, and depending where you are with your authentication, you may be farther along than others. But the first step is to properly sign all of your mail with the leading authentication solutions, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. In an aligned fashion, which I think challenges a lot of people. The more aligned you can be, obviously the better. And DMARC also has to be at an enforcement status, meaning it has to be either at a quarantine or a reject status for your mail to even be considered for BIMI. The next step is to produce the proper vector graphic, or SVG, in the tiny PS, which is also noted as portable secure version of your logo. This is a substandard of the SVG Tiny. It's slightly more secure. We've removed some of the interactive features of the SVG logos to make it lighter. And we can talk a bit more. I think, Marcel, you probably have some thoughts on the need for a PS version of the Tiny standard and why that's important as a mailbox provider. And then thirdly, as of right now, publishing your record as a self-asserted record will get your logo when you meet the qualifications. available in the existing providers outside of Google, who is in their pilot, which is currently closed. So with these 3 steps, overly simplified, you can do BIMI right now. Marcel, is there anything you'd want to add to this as a mailbox provider and sort of the implementation steps that people need to follow?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing which you hinted at, but which is missing is the assertion record, or the verification step, basically, what I would call it. So the spec calls for, or as an option, has a VMC, and I'm pretty sure we'll talk about that even more. Right now, only Google supports that or requires that within the pilot they're doing. On our side right now, because we really want to keep the hurdles or the hoops people have to jump through, I would say, the hoops as wide as possible, and the lower the bars as much as possible, to really increase adoption and help with that. We do not require VMCs at this point. If they do exist, we will use them as an additional data point, but you don't have to have them. But of course, we need to be able to make sure that not just anybody is putting any logo there. So you need to have, yeah, I guess that's right, sufficient reputation on our side, and some volume to create that reputation. So to preempt one of the possible questions is, what is the volume? There is no explicit number, right? The machine, or the volume is just a factor which informs the reputation at the end of the day, right? And you need to have some volume so that our users can interact with your email to allow you to actually build up reputation. So it's part of that equation.
Great, thanks very much for that. So the one piece that I would add in this sort of implementation step, as is right now without the VMC requirements, is if you're not doing DMARC, start there. Really get that underway, and you could publish your BIMI record now, but it won't even be considered until you've really started DMARC. So that is something to put on your roadmap if you're not doing it now. The other thing I would say is, with the VMCs, trademark is obviously something that would be required. So if you don't have a trademark at this point, you may want to consider what steps needed to move down that path as part of a bigger project here. That's all the stuff we have prepared from a slide perspective. I think we're ready to jump into the Q&A part of this session. Amanda, did you want to start? Or it looks like we have a question in the attendees.
Yes. So Brian is asking, Marcel, when you said initial BIMI results at Yahoo showed 10% increase in engagement, how was that measured?
Sure. Ever since we talked about it, we get that question a lot. And to clarify that again, what we did measure was not specifically BIMI versus not BIMI. We did a whole bunch of user studies where we looked at how do our users engage with different experiences. So this was quantitative and qualitative. We basically talked to them, but we also looked at how they actually engage and measure that engagement. And what we tested was an experience on a mobile app, right? When you are familiar with our email application, or even Google's, the general setup of a message list, and the avatars on the left, they were similar. So we tested an experience where it was just a message list, no avatars at all. We tested an experience where there was a message list, but generic avatars. And we looked at this specifically because most of the emails in our users' mailboxes, 97%, are from brands, not from people. So typically, your typical setup where you have pictures of your contacts and your contact list, right? That would not translate to an experience where it would see avatars in the message list, because most of these emails are from brands. So we tested that with generic avatars, so equivalent to what you see at Gmail with like just the little initials, I guess. And then we tested an experience where we actually showed actual avatars, like real logos. And when we compare these experiences, or between all three experiences, we saw an increase of roughly 10% in engagement. So people prefer to engage with emails they could identify, or emails where there was actually a logo. They tended to interact with them more than with emails where there was no visual indicator, I would say, to help them to decipher basically who that email is from.
Great. So the next question is, what if we have 10 brands that we dynamically swap in one send? How can we utilize BIMI in a dynamic send that swaps branding and sending domains?
Matt, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think I need a little bit of clarification on this. If you're just swapping display name, so friendly from display, BIMI is focused on the domain part of the message. So it should not impact anything with regards to swapping the display name. Now, if you are talking about swapping domains, BIMI would be tied to the domain of the message being sent to the recipient. So if you qualify to show a BIMI logo for that domain, then it should show. And if you have reputational issues beyond that, and Marcel, I know you and I have talked about how many domains do you actually need, because you could dilute your reputation with too many domains. That might be something to consider if you're not seeing BIMI as well. Maybe you've diluted your domain reputation by swapping out too many domains.
All right. Thank you. So the next question, do mailbox providers look at if BIMI is implemented, and if active, do they give some sort of benefit towards deliverability to the inbox versus spam?
I can answer that. The very short answer is no. Right? BIMI does not help you with deliverability directly, at least. It does not help you to get inbox placement. It might help indirectly, right? As we said, we have seen between different experiences where there's no logo and there is a logo, we saw an increase in engagement. And the more engagement you have with your emails, right, the better your reputation could be. And that might have a positive impact on deliverability. But just publishing a logo and then hoping that you magically get better deliverability, that's not the case.
I would add to that from experience working with clients, by going through the process of getting DMARC properly implemented, cleaning up all of the mail streams with the right SPF and the right DKIM settings, getting those created and set up properly actually helps a lot more with deliverability. Then when you implement BIMI, that's where you may see the engagement change, which in turn then feeds positive reputation into the system, which then in turn positive deliverability. So it's a part of the equation, but it's not a direct impact of the equation, if that makes sense.
Got it. Yep. The next question is, will Apple native apps eventually show a logo?
So we can't speak on behalf of Apple, either of us. I would say we would hope that Apple would build this directly into their native apps. However, if you use the Yahoo mobile app, the avatars will show in the list view for brands that enable BIMI. So it depends, I guess, what you qualify as a native app. It's an iOS app. It probably works the same on Android. So if you use the app for Yahoo, it will display BIMI logos.
Great. The next question, is there a way to test to make sure your BIMI logo is displaying? I've heard your BIMI logo will only display with a large email send.
I take that. At least for us, I don't know what Google might be doing in the future. At least for us, there is no direct way to test that. I mean, once you set it up, you should see it if you already have a good reputation. And there is a way for you to kind of see whether we actually believe you are a brand or a sender with a good reputation. If you pay very close attention to the generic logo you might see within Yahoo Mail, and if you do not see initials, but something else, then you probably are already set up for your BIMI logo to appear once you actually publish it. And then, just send your email as you normally would, and then you would see it. If you do not see it, there is on our BIMI page, there is a help link, and you can just go there and send an email, and then we'll take a look.
Yeah, using the BIMI inspector from the BIMI group should give you a good indication if it's properly configured. And if it's properly configured and you don't see it, then definitely check out the developer pages from Verizon.
All right, so the next question is, what is BIMI adoption looking like? Are there particular verticals where you're seeing higher adoption rates?
Right now, again, just speaking for us, I can't speak for Google. Obviously, they're also in a closed pilot, so it's just probably in the double digits or so participating in the pilot. On our side, we see roughly, over 2,000 probably brands right now who have a BIMI logo successfully configured and showing up. We see a few more BIMI setups, a lot more actually, but they don't meet the DMARC standard, so that's why we can't show them. So the adoption has grown over the using BIMI logos has grown over 300% or so over the last year. So it's definitely a hockey stick growth. So it's getting more and more and more. And as far as verticals, I don't think I can say that certain verticals over-index. Certainly we see a lot of banks, but we also equally see other consumer brands, very large brands, smaller brands, also very small brands, mom and pop shops, even in some cases, we see using BIMI logos.
Yeah, I would say from my client base, a lot of the financial institutions are very interested in getting this as part of their arsenal for authentication. I think it's a great way to sell the security portion to the marketing team. Like, let's make sure we get everything authenticated properly. Retail to a degree. Places where our clients have a strong brand association is where I think I've seen it more so. As well as individuals. There's a lot of individuals that are trying it on their own personal domains.
Interesting. So the next question is there a cost to implement BIMI?
The cost associated with BIMI is mostly time to get everything configured, and then whichever DMARC service you happen to be using. So there's no direct cost for BIMI, but there is associated cost with things like DMARC, management and reporting services. So they're tied together, but they're not directly related, other than paying someone to properly create your logo and host your DNS.
And also, just to clarify, because sometimes we get these questions, and just yesterday I had a similar question, whether we charge for accepting AMP email, for example. So no, we will not. There's no cost on our side, so you don't have to pay the mailbox provider to have the BIMI logo show up. I personally don't believe in features where you need to pay to have deliverability or emails being accepted. And BIMI is, to me, is a feature where we have mutual benefit, right? The brand has benefit, we have benefit for a better user experience. So it's free for all intents and purposes.
Right.
All right, so the next question is, our IT department says DMARC, SPF, and DKIM and all of the other acronyms are set up, but I still get bounced emails showing errors pertaining to those processes. Do these need to get fixed before BIMI can be utilized?
I would say I would highly recommend it. Would BIMI work for addresses or for messages that are properly validated and properly authenticated and qualify? Sure. But those addresses that are failing your authentication and bouncing because of authentication problems wouldn't see the benefit. So it's going to be a bit of your mileage may vary situation where highly recommended, but I wouldn't necessarily let it stop you from moving forward.
Great. And then the next question is, where do you publish your BIMI if you completed step 1 and step 2? I'm assuming that's in reference to the chart you showed earlier.
Sure. Marcel, do you want to?
Sure, I can answer that. So you publish the BIMI record itself in DNS, similar to how DMARC works. So it's a text record in DNS for the domain, ideally for the organizational domain. We also support it or accept it at the subdomain, the domain you're actually sending email from. Yeah, if you do not know how to set up or configure DNS text records, I would recommend talking to your IT guys there or your ESP who might be managing the DMARC records for you already. And maybe Matt, you have some other suggestions there as well.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend checking out the bimigroup.org website. The BIMI inspector tool allows you to build a record. So you can put in values such as where your image file will be hosted. So that's an important thing to know where the image file will be hosted. And basically have the record generated. It will then tell you in your DNS, create the following string and put that there. So it will give you those instructions. And that was basically sort of step 3 in that document. So if you can already go through steps 1 and 2, you have your image file, you have your DMARC set up, then you create the proper BIMI record. It looks very similar to a DMARC record for a lot of people. Sorry, a DKIM record.
And that link that Matthew referred to was just dropped in the chat, so you can grab it there if you need it.
Yeah.
And it looks like that's our last question. If anybody has any further questions, you can type them in the Q&A. We'll give you just a minute to do that. And if not, we'll announce our winners of the giveaway and wrap things up.
I think I have a question, I think, for Marcel. I think that's an interesting one for people. Marcel, when you're dealing with brands that reach out through your help site, what types of things do you see them commonly trip up over when it comes to implementing BIMI and things that people should watch out for?
It's often 3 things. The first one, which is also unique to us, is they set up BIMI on a domain which is not primarily used for brand emails or bulk emails. So that could be they set it up on their company domain, right? And then they sent me an email from joe.doe@company.org, and they hope that the BIMI logo will show up there. We do have logic on our side to not show brand logos for what we call personal emails, right? We prefer to show the actual avatar of the person who's sending that email. And we reserve brand logos for brand to consumer communication. So that is one thing we sometimes see. And some organizations have a mixed setup. They're using the same domain for personal emails as well as for brand emails. So we highly recommend to separate your traffic, like use a subdomain for your bulk email, and then you can continue to use organizational domain for personal emails, I would say. The other reason we often see is just not enough reputation. It is very small. Sometimes it's small volume. Sometimes the domain was just set up. In some cases, literally a day before. So we need to see some volume. And again, there's not a specific number. It's just, we have BIMI brands, they send not a lot, but they have highly engaged users, so that's enough. And then we have people that send a lot of email, but not a lot of people engage with it. So that also doesn't help. So it needs to be the right mix of volume and engagement for us to recognize you as a brand and say, okay, that's probably an email our users want and trust. So we show the logo. And the third thing is the SVG files. Sometimes everything is set up correctly. The BIMI record is there, DMARC is in place, but then there is a problem with the SVG. Sometimes it's that it is an SVG file, but it's actually just wrapping a bitmap file. That doesn't work. Or the sizing of the SVG file doesn't work, and then you end up, because we convert the SVG into different sizes for different purposes within our applications. We show your brand logo, not just in the message list, we also show it in what we call the deals view. If you happen to be one of those brands who also sends deals, we also show it in the contact card. So we use different sizes. And then what ends up happening on our side, sometimes it's, some of these SVG logos are just, tiny in the center of where the avatar should be, or the upper left, and that has problems. So I think these three issues are typically what trips people up. So for the third one, really, as Matt was recommending, go to bimigroup.org, use the BIMI checker, because that's where you typically catch all of these setup issues.
And Marcel, one quick clarification question. Did you say VMC is or isn't required?
For us, it is not required right now.
Okay. And then another question. Oh, sorry. Did you?
I just said they're not actually available to anyone outside of the current pilot with Google. So they will become available around the same time that we go live in the Google environment. But that will be for a later announcement.
Okay. And we had one question regarding the pilot. Is there any ETA on when that will go live for everyone?
I don't think either of us can speak on behalf of Google for that, unfortunately.
And then the last question, it looks like we have time for about one more, is have you seen any governmental or Quango interest in BIMI in its experimental phase?
Yes.
Yeah, we have seen government organizations actually set up and use BIMI.
Great.
There was one other question that came through the chat versus the Q&A. I don't know if you wanted to ask that or if we have time.
Sure, we can. Would you use the same BIMI info for marketing versus transactional emails?
So what I would say is BIMI is tied to the organizational domain typically. It can also be at the subdomain, as Marcel mentioned. So if you've implemented DMARC and BIMI at the organizational level, it should apply to both of the subdomains that you utilize for marketing and transactional email, assuming you utilize two subdomains for that. So the answer is yes, I would use the same information. And I think short of an individual overriding that at a subdomain level, most implementations would as well.
Yeah, we have seen setups though where it is different because it makes sense for the company. We've seen a bank do that. So when they send marketing emails, they use a different logo versus for their transactional consumer support emails. So in this case, it makes sense, but you still want a logo representing your brand, right? You as a company, so our users or our mutual customers are able to identify, oh, this is really coming from Bank of America or whatever.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. Those were all great questions. I would like to congratulate Karen Chang and Brian Westnich. They are the winners of the giveaway. And that is all we have for today. But thank you so much, Matt and Marcel, for your time. This was really helpful and informative.
Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for inviting us.